Welcome, everybody. It is a wonderful privilege to host this morning's session. Our main theme of this morning is mental wellness. Colleagues, I'm sure, just to set the scene, if I can recap over the last 12 months, even before COVID, we had a number of challenges. We had a perfect storm in South Africa as financial advisors and intermediaries. We were challenged economically, we were challenged politically, high levels of corruption and lawlessness in our country, high levels of unemployment, retrenchments, regulatory reform. It was a perfect storm even before we had COVID. And then almost 12 months ago, I think in March, it will be 12 months since lockdown started. And this morning's session is really all about how do we cope in a time such as this? So our main theme is going to be around how do we think and how do we act? How do we think? How do we live in a time like this? And how do we respond? And we've had, in the last 12 months, personally, I've been affected by deaths in the family, close friends, and illness. We've had staff that contracted COVID. It was really just within the perfect storm. It was just exacerbated by COVID. And here's the question. How are we doing, colleagues and friends? How are we coping and how are we responding? So I have got the wonderful privilege to introduce three panel members with me. I will largely be the facilitator. Every now and then I might chip in with another question or an input, but I'm definitely just here to facilitate three individuals who in their own right deserve to be on this panel, and I hope that their insights will ultimately provide you with much encouragement. Firstly, I want to introduce Wouter Snyman. He is my colleague and friend for many, many years in the industry. Wouter is the CEO and founder of ATU. Now, Wouter has got approximately 300 financial advisors within the ATU group. And I'm going to pose a few questions to Wouter, largely around what is happening in the financial advisory and intermediary space. How are these circumstances impacting the financial advisors? And hopefully you will be able to relate to some of the examples. And then we have got two other panel members. Firstly, Jane Ball, who is a behavioral scientist and head of population health management at Discovery Health. Now, Jane is an expert when it comes to risk management, mental wellness, mental risks, etc. And she has got a CV this long. And in the interest of time, Jane, I'm going to hope that you just forgive me not reading your entire CV. I mean, you've got a master's degree that you completed in 2018, and you passed with a distinction nogal, and that is hugely impressive. But your years of experience in South Africa in this field makes you a very, very worthy panel member. And I trust, Jane, that you will give our guys some perspective and you will be able to help them to cope in times like this. Your master's degree at the London School of Economics is in behavioral science, and she makes this declaration: finding meaningful solutions to healthcare challenges requires change by all stakeholders. Now, Jane, I couldn't agree with you more, and I guess that we will have to make a few changes if we wish to cope in times like this. My third panel member today, or our third panel member, is Tanya Kunza. Now, Tanya is an author and a top neuroscience coach. She's a sought-after speaker internationally, and she is addressing an international conference on the topic of science underpinning sales in East Asia, Toronto, and Vegas online this year. Internationally known, and Tanya is the neuroscience is her topic. She's also the former anchor, CNBC Africa anchor of a series she conceptualized, namely Healthy Business. Now, recently, Tanya was chosen as one of the top 40 women in South Africa, inspiring women. And I guess the larger community, Tanya, I don't want to just restrict you to the women community, because I know what your background just speaks to every single individual and how we must be able to adapt and how we should control what we think, how we behave. And we are going to be looking at you. Tanya is brought to us by courtesy of CIB, and we thank them for their sponsorship. And I really look forward to listening to what these two ladies are going to say during the course of today. Wouter, I'm going to start with you, and I'm just going to pose the question. In the midst of our challenges, what are your observations? Wouter, I know I've seen you on many platforms as an inspirational speaker. You're an author, and you've thought about behaviors and advisors and intermediaries. You've got a passion for our industry. If I can first ask you, what are your general observations? What has the impact been over the last 12 months in the environment in which you operate, specifically referring to the advisors and intermediaries working within the two group?
Anton, thanks. Firstly, I feel out of sorts with this esteemed panel that you guys have put together. So, but yeah, it's wonderful to just share some ideas. I think in the very first instance, I mean, you in your opening statement mentioned it, where the pandemic started off. I think most of us heard about people that were affected. And then the second wave kind of got ahead, and then it was people close to us, and then it hit home. I suffered very close to our homes, people that obviously went through the virus and suffered severely. And as financial planners, I mean, certainly the very cornerstone is that we're not isolated. I mean, we're part of the community, we make an impact in the community. And I think what we've seen is that how much of that clients rely on us right now. If you look at, and some of the panel members are experts in this field, but if you just go to the #1 ranked books sales right now in terms of financial topics, interesting enough, all of them have to do with the psychology of money, not so much just money. And as much as I think we've got a challenge around people's knowledge about finances, and we still know in the 21st century, I think the biggest atrocity is the fact that we still have financial illiteracy. And I'm not necessarily talking about South Africa, I'm talking about around the world. It's just not a subject that's taught at schools, which raises our, as a financial planner, the function and the job that we've got to a next level. And I think that in itself, during a pandemic like this, we need to start understanding how does our brains work when it comes to finances. And it works in no different way than what it would if we had to be faced by any other challenge. And in the first instance, our brains are there to protect us. And it's to protect us for survival. We know the old adage in terms of your survival brain. It's there to fight, flight, or freeze. And that's certainly what I experienced from a financial planner perspective. I've seen some of our guys just absolutely not knowing how to deal with it. And I believe that as people, we just haven't been prepared from a skill set perspective. It's a new skill set that we needed to adapt to, one of which was engaging electronically like we do right now. We've all been exposed to it, but it's not natural. It's not from a sales perspective, interacting with people. That's most probably one of the challenges that we've seen that come out of this. But we need to understand, someone said to me, we're all in the same boat in terms of this whole pandemic. And I kind of differ. I think we're in the same storm, but some of us are in rowing boats, some of us are in yachts, and some just literally have to survive by themselves. And we need to understand this, that whether it's a financial planner or if it's a client, we are exposed to all of this. And at the cornerstone of this is our emotions. One of the best ways I've seen people cope with emotions in this very tough time from a financial planner perspective is that 86% of the word emotion is motion. So people that get fixed in terms of their mindset, don't do anything, they suffer more, versus people that say, what can I do? And just get into motion, do something. Phone clients, even if you don't want to sell them anything, but just engage with them and let them understand that you're there to help.
Yeah, I need to manage this mute button again. I must say, after almost 12 months, I still haven't perfected it. So, Wouter, just a final question before I'm going to pass on to Jane. What are you guys doing to, you observe the challenges that your guys are having? What did you as a business do to make sure that your planners and your intermediaries can cope better? Surely from a leadership perspective, we have got the responsibility to adapt. We had to be resilient, but obviously one of the cornerstones of leadership is to create an environment where people can flourish despite the circumstances. So just give us one or two practical examples of what you guys did to help the planners at Atu to cope.
Thanks, Anton. Yeah, I think one of the very first things that we did was we put out a digital guide as to how to use Zoom, which at the very basic level, we would have thought everyone knew. Now, a year down the pandemic, I think, I see you also struggle with finding the mute button from time to time, but it's a skill set that in the smallest part could help us engage with clients. That was the very first thing. Second thing was to say, start talking to your clients, and we gave them kind of topics that they spoke about. We helped them with a little app that asked clients about emotional questions, just so that the clients feel that, listen, my advisor is not just there from a financial perspective, but he's also there from an emotional support perspective. The third thing that we did is we created a huge amount of collateral in terms of social media, email, newsletters, everything revolving about the emotional state and how you and I need to move through it. And the very first thing is acknowledgement. We needed to acknowledge that this is not just something that will blow over quickly. It's here to stay. And what we need to do is adapt. But adapting is difficult if you don't know what the environment is. And the only way you can do that is you need to raise your standard. You need to raise your standard from a skill set perspective. And that means we need to engage in things like Zoom. If you don't know how to do it, we literally took guys through one-on-one training and taught them some basic principles in terms of how do you engage with clients, and gave them talking topics as to what are the general things that clients fear, because fear is unfortunately a paralyzing emotion. And we need to know we either have fear or we have love. Those are the two. Any other emotion is derivatives of this. And we need to understand where clients are, not dismiss it, acknowledge the fact that you are in a very tough position, whether it's because you lost someone that's dear to you or close to you or people that you know, or maybe you lost a business. Any which way you look at it, it's a loss. And there's a fear element with it, is firstly acknowledge it and then to say, how do we start dealing with it? And we also challenge people to look after themselves from a physical well-being, because I just believe that if you look after yourself physically, you are far better equipped to deal with any emotional challenges that you have. But that's a personal choice, and we made provision for people to do that.
Thank you, Wouter. I'm going to pass on to Jane. Jane, from your perspective and your field of expertise, how do you respond to Wouter's acknowledgement of the circumstances, his awareness of what's happening around him? Firstly, how do you experience it from a product supplier point of view? What are your observations sitting in the seat where you are? And then we'll pose a few questions just to try and land it just in time for Tanya to continue. So, Jane?
I was going to say Wouter couldn't have said it better. I think everything he said is actually evidence-based. So if we look at the evidence and what sort of makes people more likely to have mental health conditions, particularly in this time, there are a number of things that make you more likely, but there are also things that make you less likely. And many of the things that Wouter mentioned are exactly what people should be doing. I mean, the first thing is around exercise. There's no doubt that exercise actually makes you more resilient. And so that's a key takeaway for anyone just personally. The second thing I think that comes across quite strongly is the ability to share your concerns. So that idea of being able to talk about what's happening and not be isolated is very key. And I'm sure many of you are already doing it, but I think even for me personally in my teams, it's just this idea of this contact with other people and being able to express how you're feeling and what's happening outside of just business. So, I mean, with my team, we all regularly check in, and it's not about your work and where you are with work, but it's about what's happening at home, how are you feeling, have you been in contact with people, you know, just so that human connection, I think, is really important at this time as well, and being able to express your concerns. And then lastly, I think what's really critical, and I think as financial advisors, I mean, is key right now, is about purpose, sort of optimism and purpose. And now more than ever, I think people really need that sound sort of fact-based advice from financial advisors. And I think it's important to hold on to that, the purpose and what people's jobs mean, and that sort of optimism for the future. So that's the evidence that says people who have those attributes are less likely to struggle with some of the mental health conditions. And then in terms of reaching out to other people, I think Vote is 100% correct. I think what we know is during times of anxiety and grief, people are probably less likely to think sort of analytically and really need people to reach out to them. We also know that anxiety makes people less likely to reach out to you. So I think this proactive approach from a financial advisor becomes key, actually knowing that people might hold back and you need to reach out to them and give them advice or support, I think is really important at this point.
Thank you very much. So, Wouter, I'm going to pose another question to you. What do you think are the attributes of the guys that you can see are really flying? I mean, what are those common denominators? Because some guys, I have the privilege to speak to a number of financial advisors across South Africa on a frequent basis. And it's quite clear that, as you said, I loved your analogy. We're all in the same storm, but we're not all in the same boat. Because it must be incredibly tough for a new entrant to the industry to start his career as a financial advisor. And then we've got experienced guys with established relationships, etc. But it seems to me that there are some common denominators of the guys, and I'd be very interested to hear your views. You got 300 guys there. Is it usually the 80-20? Could you make that? I mean, you after hours, you do all your analysis and that. I'm sure you'll have a spreadsheet that will tell us, you know, 20% are flying, etc. And you've already carved out the reasons why. So can you give us your take on what do you think are the common denominators of whether it's new to industry, 5 years and less experience, and then the older dogs, as we call them. Your views there, Wouter?
Yeah, I have to agree with Jane. I think one of the cornerstones, foundations, is a purpose, is absolutely driven by a purpose, not by profits. I think the guys that potentially suffer were definitely the guys that were just financially interested in terms of their practices, guys that had a purpose driven. I'm making a difference in the community, because we do. I believe we have got one of the most important careers and jobs out there, but it's almost like looking at climbing Mount Everest. I'm a bit fearful of that, but there are people doing it, even though there's a risk that they might die, because it is about 5% of people that die on Everest. But what they do is they plan ahead. So the guys that I believe that were successful had a proper plan in place, and not the old plan that they just dusted off, because given the circumstances, if you've got a very clear purpose, it means that you've got a vision, a goal, where you're going. And a lot of us had to reevaluate that. And I think we as individuals understand that difference when we started with New Year's resolutions last year. We all had most probably a very rosy picture, and it suddenly changed. This year, I think a lot of people I find are definitely more reserved, but it doesn't mean that you can be goalless. So the most successful guys definitely had a purpose, and they set themselves goals. And they set those goals long-term. And if I talk long-term, I'm not talking longer than 5 years, really. Medium term is almost 3 years out, but certainly then they have this ability to break down their goals from a 12-month perspective, 3 months, and then what do I do today? Because sometimes if you have a big goal, the guys that I see that chunk it down and has this ability to say, today I'm doing the following. I'm just going to phone 5 of my clients or 3 of my clients or just 1 client. They had the results, even from a financial perspective, because that activity-driven approach with a definite goal set, I saw made a massive, massive difference.
Fantastic.
Are you happy for me to, Anton, I wanted to comment on Bota's comments now, because I think they're so useful, because I think it talks also not just to like the individual themselves, but also to the service that they're providing to their clients. Because I think one of the key things at the moment to things like anxiety and grief make us even more prone to sort of like mental shortcuts or biases. And this whole idea of helping people firstly set that goal, but also being able to take action, I think becomes even more critical now. So not just around the advice, but how do we help people to overcome just what I want to do to actually doing it? And I think that's really key, just as an individual, but also as someone providing advice to other people with a long-term goal as well. So.
Brilliant. I'm very pleased that you just jumped in there when you saw the gap while I was looking for the mute button. I love panelists that can act in this way and respond. Thank you very much for that, Jane. Wouter, I'm going to ask you a last question about your observations pertaining to your advisors. But here's a personal question to you. So as the CEO of that business, faced with these challenges, many people that work in your business that you founded, how do you cope as an individual? I mean, you must be faced with similar challenges. And what personally is working for you? Why are you here sitting with enthusiasm, being able to chat about these very important things that affect all of us? So you're on the spot now, my friend.
Yeah, Anton, thanks. I think as a human being, we're all affected by this. I mean, I've had the privilege to work with really, or rather with people that achieved extraordinary things. And I'm talking about top business people. But what I found underlying that is that we're all ordinary. I mean, I have fears like anyone else. I fear for my family, my kids, what's their future. And thankfully, I've been blessed with a sense of optimism, because I do realize that that if we're not optimistic about the future, there is almost no future. We start shutting off. And what I did is I personally started from an activity perspective, looking after my physical well-being, because I realized that, you know what, if you fear, the only way for me to get rid of it is I did that. Secondly, is my faith for me is really critical. It is the foundation on which I build my life. I'm not always great at it, but I certainly had a revival from that perspective to understand where my strength comes from, and it's not me. And the third thing was really to say that I'm not in it alone. As much as I might have a leadership position in my business, I have some really great people in my business that I mean, almost kind of pick up my weaknesses, but more than that, they pick up my blind spots. And I think that's probably the most critical thing for business owners is understanding your blind spots, because we most of us know our weaknesses, and blind spots is really that thing that I think I'm great at, but everyone around me knows I'm not, but they just don't share that intimate little detail, because we all can't be great at everything. And luckily I know what mine are. It's tough to work on it, because most of us have some kind of ego, and me more than most, I suppose, and I'm working on that. And I really understand that I'm just a small person in potentially an opportunity to make a difference. And I can't always see the harvest of seeds sown, but I need to sow seeds. I can't stop doing that. And that's just personally being being there for people. I mean, if they have an issue, the ability to hear them out and not be judgmental, because I think that's the most critical thing, is that someone needs to be able to be there. whether it's for staff and or clients. I mean, we have a fair amount of clients in the field, and some of them phoned us up and shared with us that they had a tough environment and appreciated the impact that we had. And just to know, ultimately, I mean, as every financial advisor here, you have a massive influence in not your staff, if you've got staff, but very definitely the community that you operate in. And don't stop doing that. People are looking up to you to make a difference. And sometimes that difference is not just even talking, but just being willing to listen. So I certainly listened more.
Wouter, thank you. I know I put you a bit on the spot there, but thank you for sharing that with us and being vulnerable and honest. I really appreciate that comment. I think that's going to encourage many people, knowing that, sometimes when you're in the public eye or you're an author and you facilitate stuff and you do presentations, then some people may think that we've got it all together. But I personally can testify that is not the case. We are in the same storm, and gracefully we just have better mechanisms than others maybe to cope. From my perspective, I can say that the mere fact that I've surrounded myself over the years with positive and faithful people has made a massive difference in my life, because the same as you, Wouter, you articulated it very well, that we all have our blind spots and weaknesses, etc. And certainly I don't wake up every morning feeling that I'm going to change the world. There are a couple of things that we need to get out of the way first before I pick up strength again. And I was very excited about this morning's session. I must tell you, this is one of the things that got me out of bed this morning. These two specialists that are joining us, Wouter, I can't wait. I'm going to put Jane on the spot now again. Jane, on paper, reading through your CV, you are this well-accomplished, like Tanya, these professional ladies that we as an industry are blessed with. Over the years, one of the things that I've realized is that the women are becoming a massive, and they've been for a while now, but it's as if the leadership in women is just moving strides ahead. So, looking at you on the screen and reading your CV as well as Tanya, I mean, these highly professional, well-qualified women, how do you cope, Jane?
I think I'm lucky, Anton, to have a good support structure. So I think that is key. I mean, having, my husband and everyone else who supports me is very important. But I also think, like Wouter mentioned, it's doing something that you're really passionate and interested in. I mean, for me, this is something that's fascinating, that makes a difference in people's lives. So I think that helps a lot. But really, also importantly, having that support structure that allows you to do it is really important as well.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that. It brings us to about 1 minute ahead of schedule, Tanya. I hope that you've done your warming up exercises in the background there, that you are ready for your talk. You looked ready since you have joined us. So Tanya, I'm not gonna, I can say the same thing about your CV. It's too long to read, but I'm just going to remind our listeners again that I could see that you're one of the top neuroscience coaches in the world, and you are internationally, have you got a footprint? So we can't wait to hear what you're going to share with us. So welcome to our session, and you've got 25 minutes with no interruptions. I'm just going to let you go. 25 minutes, and then 5 minutes to 10, I'm going to chip in so that we can close. So Tanya, so welcome. It's a privilege to have you with us. I think you're still on mute there, Tanya.
Sorry, I'm just trying to get our screen here. Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be part of this amazing panel, Wouter and Jane. It's been a pleasure to be watching and listening to what you had to say. I joined the panel today because I wanted to be clear on trying to bring everything in. And I got to say, Wouter, you're very much on the same page as me. I almost feel like we had a sharing of my slides, which are forthcoming. So one of the things that I want to do is I just want to quickly get onto the slide sharing quickly. and make sure that I do that for you. So let's go here. Carmen, do you want to give me a hand here quickly? I'm just going to get the slide sharing happening. There we go. And we just want to get that on. From start. And I think we're in business. Can you see?
It's up. Lovely. Can see
Fabulous.
it.
Right. So there we go. All this tech, hey? So the most amazing thing that's really come through for me is we're talking about Psychoneuro 21. And I want to talk a lot about that neuroscience underpinning all these dynamics, which we need to look at. And one of the big things, and Wouter, you actually leaned into it a little bit, is neuropresenting. And neuropresenting is something really important. People need to see your hands. They need to see your wrists actually are exposed, because the primal brain, which you referred to earlier, can't handle the sort of head and shoulders. It thinks that you're hiding something. And obviously the positioning of one on a screen and all of those dynamics. So you did that incredibly well, where you were using your hands, and we saw a lot of you sort of an exposed throat. Those aspects are very, very important when doing the neuropresenting, which I didn't actually have too much in my slides, but I want to move into that. So today we're going to talk a lot about positive psychology and the impact on the financial bottom line. In the last 3 months of last year, I actually coached 600 people. And the reason I'm mentioning that is I was called into companies as a bit of a parachute in and repair. And there was a lot of negativity. As we know, there was a lot of panic. There was a lot of uncertainty. What people didn't realize is that they never had certainty. Their entire lives, in any moment, anything could have happened. But COVID brought to the fore that there was a lack of certainty. So when I went into the organizations and I worked with the individuals, what I shifted was I gave them a sense of certainty again in their environment that they're working in, as much as it was before COVID. And then we worked on positivity. We worked on the more prefrontal cortex exercises and making people more aware of the positivity and the positive psychology that we were bringing in. And the results have been amazing. I've had clients exceeding targets in the financial services space. I've had targets reached right in the beginning of the year, which have been amazing. So people have really, really done incredibly well in this process. I'm not going to run through that street cred with you. So, trending coaching insights that I've looked at, because I wanted to see what was going on. I've got a very inquiring mind, and I wanted to find out what was going on. So I looked at all revenue generators, whatever you've called yourselves in your particular positions within organizations. And I've looked at remote working around the world and trying to understand what working from home actually did to industries at large, but we're looking obviously in the financial services space definitively. Now, the outcomes were quite astounding. A whopping 72% had no travel and no customer visits. Now, the ramifications of that on the financial bottom line would have presented exponentially. Then we had 32% limited field visits, only with certain exemption, and 6% with a hybrid, and only 2% continued business as usual. Now, those, I can tell you right now, those 2% were probably flourishing because they were actually able to get back on the bus very quickly. One of my major corporates that I work with brought their people back the first day that they had to, with lots of pushing back and very unhappy people in the first few minutes. And then they realized actually they ended up better off because they were back in the swing of things again. So getting a sense of normalcy was very, very important. So what can we deduce from this long-term impact? And what we can deduce is a lack of confidence from the employer, the buyer, and the seller when we're looking at that 72% that have literally had to completely change their normal. And we are so ingrained in our normal. Now, I wanted to understand why that all happened. And it's been a tremendous amount of, out with the old, in with the new, re-strategize, refocus, retrain in such a short space of time. And it takes us a very long time as a species to actually learn how to do all of these new things. And what we learned was that our most valuable skill set now are soft skills. And Wouter, you mentioned a tremendous amount of soft skills when you were presenting now, and we leaned quite heavily into those. And one of the aspects which I find quite interesting is I've had soft skills referred to over the years as fluffy and as not important, and almost as on the back burner. where soft skills are critically important. EQ, being vulnerable. You know, you were mentioning vulnerability earlier, and thank you for being vulnerable. Those are aspects of self that have come tremendously to the fore. You know, and we need to look at, there again, statistics saying that 72% needed motivation and a boost in morale. And that's what I was called in to do. And that did impact the financial bottom line. So bringing in motivation and staff morale, incredibly important. Then we look at 52% flexible arrangements and caregivers and giving care to parents and so on. Very important. A lot of people got into that habit of being with children, being with parents that needed help. And that's something we need to really concentrate on as well. We've got to try and help people move away from that space and get back into the normal. Procrastination came up time and time again. In fact, I created an entire course around procrastination and how to alleviate it. All those elements around that we need to focus on. So if you find your people are slower, they're not looking motivated, maybe it's actually procrastination which has crept in. And then, of course, lack of confidence in living in a new world that people haven't had a chance to adapt to as yet. Then I had a look at the top 10 soft skills which we should be employing or coaching. And I have a bit of an oxymoron going on here, remote teamwork. You know, how do we create a team remotely? And I'm going to lean into that a little bit later with the assistance of Phil Hagen in the UK. I've got a lot of material from him. He's my partner in the UK. He's a psychologist and brings a tremendous amount of value. Then we look at communication. Now I'm talking about neuropresenting. I'm going to lean into that a little bit deeper in a moment. Being nimble and able to adapt is a soft skill that people that have got a high dominance and high influence attribute would be able to do a lot better than people who are more systematic and structured and leaning more into the knowledge side of things. You know, people that are working from a textbook more than they work from being adaptable will have really battled in this space. Then thinking outside the box and solving the problems. And Vota was talking about not getting stuck, emotion, energy, and motion, absolutely in agreement there. Being creative, thinking outside the box, using the right brain, very, very powerful. Emotional intelligence, you know, having your ethical value systems in place. And there again, also not worrying so much about what other people think, but how you feel about it. So that's another very big aspect people need to lean into. And that revolves around the ego tremendously. So the ego says, I'm concerned about what other people think of me, where your ethical value system and your internal locus of control should be leaning into, what do I feel? How do I feel about myself? Does this feel right for me? And trusting self, very important aspect of self to build. Time efficacy, very important, the difference between being efficient and effective. And there's another whole dynamic around that. Self-leadership, very, very important. And also having effective systems and structures, regardless of whether you're systematic or not. So those skill sets need to be developed and built within every organization. And even for children at school, actually, they need to learn those things. Now, we all know that it takes 66 days to create a habit, not 21 as it was erroneously put out there many years ago, which is 22 working days times 3 months. And we have to now unlearn a lot of those bad lockdown habits that we had learned and then relearn new habits moving into our future. So that's another aspect we need to be well aware of. Then we have to look at media training as a focus, as I said, as we began. So this neuropresenting, very, very important. There are key takeouts that we need to be aware of, how the camera is positioned, how much of your body is visible, how your hands are visible, and a whole host of colors that need to be looked at. There are so many aspects in presenting, how to project your energy through into media. So obviously being a former CNBC anchor, I learned how to project on media. So this whole transition has been quite easy for me. And interestingly, I'm coaching clients in Australia, I'm coaching clients in America at the moment with the same effect and impact and positive impact as I've had with people that are right in front of me. So there is a shift in what is deemed important, and we really need to pay attention to that. You know, people are reporting screen fatigue. Are they still listening? And if you're not presenting effectively, and if you're not projecting effectively, are you actually getting your people? Or are you having pointless meetings and box ticking and saying, well, I met with 8 people today, but was it effective? Did you get the impact? Was the output there? Did you get the information you needed from that person and the buy-in? Because you're selling a different aspect of self now when you're selling online. Do we need to get moving again? And there again, you know, Vota, I was wondering if you'd actually looked at my slides before because you were on point with me. You know, should we reconsider social distancing meetings? I've had so many of them where we sit halfway across, you know, either side of the boardroom table. And, you know, those are very powerful and they really do work. Take it outside. You know, we've got a tremendous country where we can have meetings outside, and then walking meetings. You can have meetings where you actually, you know, in a walking space and actually have meetings there. So I think those are very powerful. We need to look at bringing those in. Then I put in inverted commas the new normal. The changes that have been voted to stay. Now, this was a global survey done. 78% of people said increased communication, increased training, and increased coaching programs. So what does that tell us? It tells us that people don't know how. So right now we need to empower our teams, our staff, and our people with how. How do we present neuro-presenting? How do we communicate with people in a completely different space? How do we get brave again? Then 70% wanted an adaptation of new sales tools. The old way of selling is the old way of selling. It doesn't work anymore. We've got to look at a whole host of different methodologies that are far more tech-based and also, you know, keeping it simple for people. Long-winded information. People have screen fatigue. They're not going to be reading long-winded proposals and presentations anymore. We've got to keep it to the point, keep it simple. So the face of sales and marketing has shifted and it has changed, and that is a definitive. Has your company adapted? Is the question that you need to be asking yourselves. Then what are the biggest areas of awareness ahead? So we need to look at 78% morale. So important. We need to lean into those soft skills and we need to boost morale. 58% remote training and coaching. That is definitive and we need to bring that in. A lot of companies are experiencing reduced budgets. We looked at 46%. Where you're spending your money now has also shifted. You've got to invest in your marketing. You've got to invest in your coaching and training, and you've got to invest in building and developing those soft skills. So in some companies, that'll actually be turning budgets on its head. That's what's really important right now. And then we've got to look at 30% burnout, churn, stress-related health concerns, where we really need to help and get people out of what Vota also referred to earlier as the fight, flight, or freeze space, and really getting them to more a space of attentional awareness and moving out of where they are right now. All right, so my winning formula that I've used for many years is train your brain to stay positive. It starts with motivation. Why am I doing this? Then you've got to put a plan in place, because without a plan, motivation is just motivation. Then implementation, because if you don't implement consistently, your plan is going to fall flat. And then accountability to that plan, and try not to be only accountable to self, be accountable to others. And then, of course, consistency is the buzz to get gold. So if you're going to take anything out of this, the winning formula is that we've got to get the motivation, the plan, the implementation, accountability, consistency, and make sure that we're driving forward. We cannot be stagnant in this time. Okay, and now we're leaning a little bit into the behavioral assessments. And this is the aspect that I find intriguing. So we've been profiling people with Phil Hagen in the UK. We've profiled over 15,000 people in South Africa alone. And for me, it's all about individuality. You cannot have a broad stroke anymore at all. You've got to look at the individual. And we've done that with these assessments, and using something as simple as the DISC profiling process, we've been able to ascertain quite a few very interesting things. What are the potential issues of working from home for different types of people? So we want to look at the employees, the employers, and the customers, because it applies across the board. Now, like I said before, and I'm really emphasizing this, one size does not fit all. And we need to look at reducing stress, because we've seen that that was a very high component, and we need to start improving success. We've got to shift the world view. We've got to look a lot more at having a look at these accurate plans that support behavioral character traits. because trying that one size is not going to work. And I cannot emphasize that enough. Okay, so we need to look at structure. When we were working from an office, we had structure. Home needs to have that same structure for a specific type of person. So we'll lean into who that is. Then traveling from home to the office gave you time to think, gave you time to work through things, listen to maybe a motivational speaker. We need to try and bring some of those aspects back into your home environment if you're still working from home. Then normality, security, support. You need to make a list of things that you have control over. Put that up somewhere you can see it so that you can get some kind of normality and understanding that you actually have some form of control still in your life. As much as it might not be accurate, it's still going to give you a form of security and support. And then a very clear work-life balance and work-life divide. So personal, interpersonal, and work. There needs to be a clear divide, especially if you're working from home in an area that might not be definitively removed, like a dining room table or somewhere that you're working from that's more of a life space. Try and make sure that you clear it up at the end of the day, make it into a home space, and start rather having a very clear divide between work-life balance. Right. So now a few more considerations that we need to look at. We've looked at the interaction with others, structure and security. When we were at work, we would often have a coffee break or a cigarette break if people smoked, and then working with people. They'll have those interactions still, continue them. Phone a friend that's from the office if you get a sort of tea break and have a quick chat. Try and keep those interactions with others continuing. So I'm going to click onto the next slide now because it reiterates. We had a look that work-related stress, depression, and anxiety in Great Britain, 602,000 workers were suffering from work-related stress in 2018-2019. And 12.8 million working days were lost due to work-related stress, depression, and anxiety. We need to lean into the mitigation of stress, depression, and anxiety, and helping people move through and work through in that space. 44% indicated workload. Now, I need to look into that and say, we need to look at the assisting of people from a workload perspective, helping them with all the things and all the soft skills that we've just walked through now. So we need to understand those definitively. Then again, bringing Phil Hagen in, we're going to look at some tips for the DISC working from home. Now, a lot of companies have run DISC programs and will actually have DISC profiles on their people. Please use them. They're very, very effective. Now, if we look at the group D in isolation, obviously there's 48 different types because there's 48 different variations. But if we take the dominant in isolation, they're determined and they're focused and they're driven. They are much more self-sufficient and they prefer being autonomous. They don't want to be checked in on often. They want to be left alone if they are being effective. Rather look at their outcomes and leave them to it. They will be focused and assertive once they've got their processes going. And when you equip them, that's what they're going to need from you. They don't need the check-in all that often. In fact, it actually will probably irritate them. They need to know that they can be effective and they can be efficient. So make sure that they've got, if they need printers, if they need good Wi-Fi, if they need good tech, make sure that they are given those aspects so that they can actually just get on with it. They like getting on with it. They'll check in when they need to, but judge them on outcomes rather than judging them on checking in, micromanagement, and all of those dynamics can actually prevent them from being successful. So they will be succinct, they will be efficient, and they actually will be time disciplined because they want to get the job done. The high dominant is all about achieving. It's about achieving the goal. So we need to really focus on them. Then they'll give themselves a demanding work schedule. Set high goals for them, set or sometimes unrealistic goals for them so that they really strive to achieve them. We need to look at the company's reason and facts. We need to lean into those aspects. And then they would want recognition for their work ideas and recognition for their success, not necessarily personally. So, giving them a pat on the back for themselves isn't going to motivate them, but saying that their ideas were brilliant and saying that they were successful. That's the empowerment that we're wanting for the high dominant groups. Right, then we look at the high influencers. So they bring the energy, they bring the fun and the enthusiasm. They would have been the groups I would have worked with a tremendous amount and given so much time and care to, because they need people. So as much as you cannot guarantee whether they'll be introverted or extroverted as a high I, the high I needs people around them. They need to interact with people. They need the daily phone call. They need to go back to the office as soon as possible. And it's incredibly important that they, because they will suffer from loneliness. And so that's the group that I would really, really focus on tremendously and try and bring back in. And a lot of people in the financial services space that are client facing will have chosen that because they are high I's. So that's an area I would really encourage you to look at. They're positive, they're enthusiastic. If they're not positive and they're not enthusiastic, that's your window that says, please look at me, help me, I need your assistance. So I've got a few minutes to get through everybody else. I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but a lot of video conferencing, they need to go on the neuro presenting because they can project. And they should be doing a tremendous amount of that. Regular daily contact, very, very important with this kind of group. They need their managers to be doing a lot of hand-holding and summarizing conversations in writing that you both agree upon so that we don't get into a state of procrastination. All right, and then we move on to your high S, which is your steadiness and your pace. They don't like change. So they would have battled in the beginning with the change. But over their 66 working days of being alone in their homes, they would have found their flow and they would have actually adjusted quite nicely and quite frankly, probably enjoyed working from home because they would have created their systems, their structures, and their process. They don't like taking risks. So they would have liked to have actually been set up. So the beginning of this whole process would have been really debilitating. But once they found their feet, they would have probably started really enjoying it and not wanting to come back to the office, not wanting to get back into that old normal because now they've actually got their new normal. So looking at that group, I would say if you can allow them, set clear goals, set clear outcomes, and make sure that there's no procrastination creeping in there, but maybe even where possible, keep the high S groups working from home. And then we look at the high C groups. They're all about knowledge and attention to detail. And they're a slower group because they're going to be spending a lot more time. So the big caution I've got to my high C groups is please, please don't give too much information out there. If you're going to send something and you've written a 3-page document, the probability of someone actually reading that in this time of screen fatigue is highly unlikely. Summarize your salient points where possible. And as you would be writing something, let's say on a WhatsApp, or if you were going to be writing a post on social media that read more ... You can attach as much as you want after the fact, but please be certain that you are not giving too much information overload because now you have time. Time is something you didn't have before. Now you have the time to research and to really share your knowledge, but make sure that you are doing that succinctly and to the point. At least your first opening paragraph should be a nice summation of what is following on from there. The high C group will be organized and thoughtful in their approach. And there again, once they found their flow, I could say could quite comfortably continue working from a remote working environment, or could come into the office occasionally just to see people, but really would be quite comfortable in that space. So Anton, with that, I'm not sure if you have any other questions you'd like to ask me before I sum up.
I think our time is such that you are welcome to sum up there, Tanya. Thank you very much.
Right. How much more time would you like to afford me on this? Because I know we're working to, are there any questions that some people might have? Because I've made sure that we've got all this information out there for everybody.
Tanya, I think we've got about 6 minutes left. So okay. We need to round up, but you're welcome to take another minute just to close your session.
Fantastic. I'm very happy to do that. Okay, so in summation from my session, what I'm saying again is neuro presenting is incredibly important. You need to learn how to present online so that you are reaching your audience and that you are making sure that your audience are actually working with you. I would say that we need to lean heavily into the soft skills, make sure that you do a lot of homework on that. A lot of people haven't done that. There are a lot of courses out there that build and develop the soft skills. If you haven't profiled your teams, now's the time to do so, to understand who your people are, how they function most effectively, and to make sure that you're getting the most out of your people by understanding uniquely and individually who they are. Thank you, Anton.
Tanya, thank you to you. It was a most effective and interesting and relevant talk that you gave us today. A lot of points. I did take a few snapshots here. That's why I put my camera off so that you couldn't see me taking some shots on the slides. And thank you so much for this very valuable contribution. Most appreciated. I'm going to just use the last couple of minutes maybe just to share a quick personal story, and maybe some of you can relate, because I had the privilege over the last few months to speak at 3 funerals. That does affect someone. You know, you reflect a lot about life. If you have family members who died and passed away and close friends, I want to tell you a quick story. A very good friend of mine, he was the principal at Maragon Mooikloof School. He passed away. He's my age. So the family asked me to speak at his funeral, and that led to a lot of reflecting in this time. I mean, if ever South Africa could not afford the loss of a great principal, he was a most brilliant, excellent man. And there were 2 young black boys speaking. They had no father, and he became their father. And they delivered a speech at his funeral that had everybody in tears. So when you get people that really make an impact in other people's lives pass away, and they're your age, and then you start to reflect about your own relevance. And if I had to put him in a category, he was definitely on a higher category as a person as myself. I would rate myself below him. And I had to ask the question, why would a person like that die of COVID and I'm still left behind? What do I make with that? And how do I continue to make a contribution? Do I still want to? Do I feel relevant? And this is where the self-leadership issue that Tanya referred to comes into play. So I had this battlefield in my mind going on. And perhaps some of you, I've had the privilege in Rustenburg to speak to a group of people in the short-term industry, about 25 employees. And one can just sense the level of heaviness that people are dealing with at this time. So I went through a lot of thinking and wondering, what do I make of all of this? How do I respond? And maybe for some of you, even if it means something to one person, I would think it's worth it. You know, so here's my thinking process. Surely there must be a reason why it was Chris Zyman who died in January, the 4th of January, and why not me? Because COVID has got no favorites. Some people are unaffected by it, some people are not. And how do we cope with all this drama? 3 funerals in 2 months. And it could have been me. Why not me? And if not me, how do I respond? So maybe some of you can relate to this. So this is how I've thought things through for myself. And it gives me encouragement, and hopefully some of you can resonate. So colleagues, and this is a personal thing, I start every day with prayer, then I am reminded of my purpose, and then I have to plan. I have to prioritize, because it's almost as if we are bombarded. Now that we are home, we've got more time. So the expectations are higher, etc. So in other words, prayer, purpose, being reminded of it, and planning. That's what I do. I was filled with an immense amount of gratitude. You know, I told a friend of mine the other day, if I'm healthy and we've got good family relationships and I've got work, I can provide for my family. How blessed are we if you fall into that category, if you compare it to other people? So my first thing is gratitude. And once you have gratitude, it's a humbling experience knowing that some of these things are just a gift to us. And how do we respond to that gift? If that is you, if you are healthy and you've got good family relationships and a job. Maybe if you don't have good family relationships, it's something that you can work on, because that impacts your productivity at home. It makes you feel better. You are mentally better off, and that might propel you into the future. So, colleagues and friends, I see it is 10 o'clock. I must tell you, I've prayed for all of you this morning before we started, and I really hope that you find the energy and the enthusiasm to go ahead in these times. And I want to thank my panel members, Wouter, Tanya, and Jane. You have been absolutely spectacular and marvelous. Please put on your camera screens on again. I can give you a virtual wave here. I need to look you in the eye and say, Jane, you have been brilliant. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. I'm sure that the people enjoyed you as much as I did. And Tanya, you were remarkable. I am so pleased we had you here. Wouter, my dear friend, thank you. This was a special time. Really enjoyed it with you. And amongst the panel members, on behalf of all of us, we wish all the delegates who attended today just the very best. And you keep strong, keep fighting. So thank you very much, everybody. It was a pleasure hosting you all.